Okay, so today we're doing another deep dive. We've got this stack of sources, some reports from the Utah Bureau of Criminal Identification, Ogden Police, and also Ryan Scott Bush's obituary.
Yeah, really poignant material. And we're focusing specifically on his unsolved homicide case out of Ogden, Utah.
Exactly. And just to be clear up front, our goal here is to stick strictly to what's in these documents. We want to understand the known facts, the timeline, the key parts of the investigation, and, well, the questions that still linger based only on this information.
Right. No speculation beyond what the sources suggest. We're unpacking the files as they are.
Okay, so let's start with Ryan himself. According to these reports, he was 20 years old, living in Ogden, Utah, described as non-Hispanic or Latino, hazel eyes, brown hair. Pretty standard identifying details.
And the critical date these sources point to is April 16th, 2013. That's the last time anyone reportedly saw him.
Then, just 4 days later, April 20th, his mother reports him missing. And the reports emphasize why this immediately set off alarm bells. It wasn't just that he was missing, it was the context.
hmm The sources flag this as highly unusual. And the reason, they apparently had nearly daily communication. That sudden silence, that's what investigators keyed in on right away.
That lack of contact, it suggested something serious could be wrong from the very start. Foul play was likely a concern almost immediately.
Absolutely. It wasn't like someone who drifted out of contact gradually. This was a sharp break from routine.
And then the timeline just accelerates in this, well, just a devastating way. Last seen April 16th,
Reported missing April 20th.
and then his body is discovered on April 28th.
Yeah, just 8 days after that missing person report was filed.
Wow. So from missing report to confirmed homicide in basically a week, that speed, it just underscores how severe and sudden this all was.
It really does. It implies things happened very quickly after he disappeared.
Before we get deeper into the investigation side, let's pause on Ryan the person. The obituary you shared gives us a much fuller picture. He was born April 9th, 1993, right there in Ogden. So yes, exactly 20 when he died.
And you really feel the family connection reading it. Son of Tina Ross and Ryan Bush. He had siblings, Jordan, who's actually called his best friend in the text.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Brandon, Ashley, and Kirsten. Grandmothers Sharon and Patty mentioned. And Grandpa Dennis Miller, also his fiancée, Carla Heron.
That detail about playing games and cards with his mom, sometimes earning foot massages, it's such a small, humanizing detail. Really shows their closeness.
It does. It brings him to life beyond the case file facts. It reminds you this was a real person with real relationships. He had lots of aunts, uncles, cousins, too.
The passions. Sounds like a big sports guy. The obituary mentions the LA Lakers and Cincinnati Bengals would miss their biggest fan.
Yeah. And there's that nice little anecdote about the NFL bets with his Aunt Kelly, enjoying a win, especially if it was against the Steelers. Just sounds like a fun-loving young man.
Totally. Also into camping, music, bowling, monster trucks, swimming, attended Mountain View High School. You put all that together.
And you get a sense of the life that was lost. It makes understanding the clinical facts of the case and why it's still unsolved feel much more impactful, much more urgent for the listener, I think.
Okay, so shifting back to the official side. Both the Utah BCI Bureau of Criminal Identification and the Ogden Police Department, they classify this how?
They both categorize it as an unsolved homicide cold case.
Which means, essentially, the case is still open, right? They haven't given up, but maybe active leads have run dry for the moment.
That's pretty much it. The
Okay.
commitment to solve it is there, officially at least. But it's waiting for a break, new information, something to reignite the active investigation.
Now, here's a detail from the reports that seems absolutely critical. It states Ryan's body was discovered out of state on April 20th.
Yes. And crucially, the sources clarify that investigators determined his body had been transported out of state from Utah. The specific other state isn't named in what we have, but the act of moving him is key.
Okay, so how does that one detail, moving the body across state lines, fundamentally change or complicate an investigation like this, based on the reports?
Oh, massively. First, it strongly suggests a calculated effort to cover tracks, right? To hinder the investigation.
Trying to hide the primary crime scene.
Exactly. Moving the body makes finding that original location and any forensic evidence there incredibly difficult. You might not even know which state the actual crime occurred in initially.
And then you run straight into jurisdictional problems.
Precisely. Which police department takes the lead? Which state's laws apply? It requires coordination, often complex coordination between agencies in different states, maybe even federal involvement depending on the circumstances. That layer of complexity is a huge challenge.
It definitely sounds like a major reason this could still be cold.
It's almost certainly a significant factor, yeah.
The sources say the main agency is the Ogden Police Department. A Detective Childress is listed as a contact, and it's listed on the Utah BCI cold case website, so it still has that state-level visibility.
And the reports acknowledge that investigators have pursued leads over the years since 2013. But unfortunately, they just haven't been able to identify the suspect or suspects involved.
And as is pretty common in these cases, there isn't much in the public domain, or at least in these sources, about specific theories, motives, persons of interest.
Right. And that's usually very intentional and cold case work. You hold back certain details only the perpetrator or investigators would know.
Why is that so important?
Well, a few reasons. It protects the integrity of the investigation if a new lead emerges. It prevents potential suspects from, changing their story based on public information. And it helps investigators vet tips if someone comes forward with information only the police or the killer should have. That tip carries a lot more weight. It's a necessary balancing act.
Makes sense. Switching back to the human element, you mentioned the obituary tribute book. There were messages in there from someone named C. Christie Hancock.
Yeah, repeatedly from 2015 and then again and again right up to 2024. And the messages are consistent, just this deep, persistent longing for answers and for justice.
Wow. Over a decade later.
It's incredibly moving. It just hammers home that for the family, for loved ones, this isn't history. The grief, the need for resolution, it doesn't fade just because time passes. It highlights that enduring pain.
It really does. It shows this is still very much an open wound for people who knew and loved Ryan. And connecting that back to the investigation, law enforcement is still actively asking for help, according to these documents.
Absolutely. They make it clear they believe someone in the community might hold the key. They list specific ways people can come forward.
Right. You can call the Ogden Police Department directly, 801-395-8228, and ask for Detective Childress.
There's also a dedicated cold case tip hotline number, 833-377-7233.
And there's an online option, too.
An electronic tip form on the Utah BCI website.
And looking at the description of that form, it seems pretty detailed. Asks about the incident, victim, persons of interest names, descriptions, vehicles, associates, things like that.
Yeah, standard investigative fields. Yeah. But what's really interesting and probably strategic is that providing your own contact information, name, phone, email, is listed as optional on that form.
Ah, so they're trying to encourage even anonymous tips.
That seems to be exactly the purpose. Lower the barrier. If someone is scared or maybe has conflicting loyalties but knows something important.
They can still share it without identifying themselves.
Precisely. They're prioritizing getting the information, hoping that even an anonymous piece of the puzzle could be the breakthrough they need after all this time.
That continued appeal, making it easy to provide info, even anonymously. It really speaks volumes about how critical community input is in these long-term cold cases. They're still hoping someone remembers something, or maybe someone's conscience finally gets the better of them.
That's the hope, definitely. That single piece of overlooked information might still be out there.
So wrapping up our deep dive based purely on these sources. Ryan Scott Bush, tragically murdered in 2013. His case remains an unsolved homicide cold case. His body was transported out of state, adding significant complexity. No suspects identified.
And over a decade later, law enforcement continues to seek information, and his loved ones continue to wait for answers and for justice.
It leaves us with a lot to think about. For you, the listener, maybe consider this. How does that element of crossing state lines specifically impact the odds of solving a crime like this? And perhaps more importantly, what does that enduring grief we see in those tribute messages tell us about the profound, lasting human cost when a case like Ryan's remains unsolved year after year?